The grand chamber of the Galactic Council stretched upward into darkness, its crystalline walls reflecting the light of 1,000 stars from 1,000 worlds across the galaxy, and at its center floated representatives of 12 ancient species, who had maintained order across civilized space for longer than human. Recorded history had existed. Dambasard Theln of the Valorix Empire stood at the speaker's podium, his four eyes gleaming with barely concealed amusement as he read the terms of humanity's admission to galactic society, and his voice carried the tone one might use when explaining simple concepts to a child. The human species, having recently achieved primitive faster-than-light capability, is hereby granted protectorate status under Galactic Council Resolution 4472. Velln announced, and his mandibles clicked in what his species used as a dismissive gesture. Humanity will be restricted to the fringe sectors, specifically systems designated as Zone Thatanine through Theta 47, and no human vessel may be constructed with weapons exceeding Class 2 defensive armaments, and no human colony may be established without council approval, and humanity will pay a tribute of 15% of all extracted resources to the council treasury for the privilege of protection under council law in the human delegation area. Secretary General Maria Santos sat with her hands folded on the table before her, and her face remained calm, professional, diplomatic, but her knuckles had gone white with the pressure of her grip, and beside her, Admiral Chen Wei stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched so tight that his teeth ached. The other human delegates showed similar restraint, years of diplomatic training keeping their expressions neutral, even as shame and anger warred within them, and they had come to the stars hoping to find friendship, partnership, a place among the great civilizations of the galaxy. Instead, they had found contempt, the fringe sectors. Ambassador Korvath of the Drenary Collective leaned toward his aide, not bothering to lower his voice in the translation devices, caught his words, and broadcast them throughout the chamber. The systems are worthless, and barren rocks and gas giants with barely enough minerals to justify surveying, let alone colonizing exactly. Another delegate responded with what passed for laughter among his kind. We're giving them nothing and calling it generosity, and within a generation they'll come begging for better territory, and then we'll see how proud these primitives really are. Thelne continued reading the restrictions as if he were doing humanity a tremendous favor. Human military forces will not exceed 20,000 personnel across all colonies, and human ships must submit to inspection by council patrols at any time, and humanity will have observer status in council proceedings, but no voting rights for a probationary period of not less than 500 standard years, 500 years. Secretary General Santos did the math in her head, and that was longer than the United States had existed, and longer than most human nations had survived, and the council expected humanity to wait that long just for the right to have a voice in decisions that affected their own people. Rose to her feet slowly, and every eye in the chamber turned toward her, and for a moment she considered rejecting the terms, considered telling these arrogant beings exactly where they could put their protectorate status. But behind her sat the hopes of 8 billion humans and 3 colony worlds, and dozens of stations and outposts scattered across space, and if she rejected these terms, the Council could just as easily declare humanity a rogue element and sanction them, blockade them, or worse. So she swallowed her pride like bitter medicine and spoke in a clear, steady voice. The United Earth Government accepts the terms of Council Resolution 4472. She said, and each word felt like a betrayal. We thank the Council for welcoming humanity into galactic civilization, and we pledge to abide by all restrictions and requirements placed upon us. Thelnd, mandibles clicked again, in what was definitely amusement this time. How gracious of you to accept the Council's generosity, he said, and the condescension dripped from every word. The Council welcomes humanity to the galactic community, and may you learn much from your betters in the years to come. The formal session ended, and the human delegation filed out in silence, and no other species approached them to offer congratulations or welcome, and instead, delegates from the great civilizations clustered in groups, casting glances at the humans, and making no effort to hide their disdain in the transport back to their diplomatic vessel. The humans finally allowed their masks to slip. Betters, Admiral Chen spat the word like a curse. Did you hear how he said it? And like we're children playing dress-up in our parents' clothes, I heard? Santos replied, and her voice was flat, emotionless. And all the more dangerous for it, the entire galaxy heard, and they're all laughing at us. We should have rejected it, said Ambassador Okonkwo, Earth's representative to the African Union. We should have told them to take their protectorate status and what? Santos interrupted, and her eyes flashed. Go to war with 12 species who've been conquering stars since our ancestors were hunting with stone tools and we barely have 30 FTL-capable warships, and they have thousands, and we lose that war. James and we lose it badly. The transport fell silent except for the hum of its engines, so we accept this. Chen said quietly, we accept being second-class citizens in our own galaxy for now. Santos said, and something in her tone made them all. Look at her, we accept it for now, and we go to our worthless fringe sectors, and we do what humanity has always done, and we survive, and we build, and we learn, and we remember every slight, every insult, every moment of their contempt, and then, Okonkwo asked Santos, stared out the viewport at the massive council station. At the ships of a dozen species coming and going with casual authority, and then we'll see if they're laughing. 20 years from now, the years that followed were hard ones for humanity, and the fringe sectors lived up to their reputation as worthless and barren worlds with thin atmospheres that required constant maintenance and asteroid fields that made navigation treacherous, and gas giants whose magnetic fields played havoc with human technology. But humans were nothing if not stubborn. They turned barren rocks into farms, using hydroponics and genetic engineering, and they built cities inside asteroids and hollow moons, and they extracted resources from the most unlikely places with efficiency born of desperation and necessity, and they followed every single rule the Council imposed. When Council inspectors came to examine human weapons, they found nothing above Class II defensive armaments, and when Council patrols demanded to search human vessels, captains submitted without complaint, and when the Council demanded their 15% tribute, humanity paid it exactly on time. Every time the other species watched this with satisfaction, and clearly humans knew their place, and clearly they lacked the spine to demand more, and clearly the Council had been right to treat them as inferiors. But they didn't see what was happening in the quiet spaces between the stars, and they didn't see how every human colony, every station, every outpost was connected by a network of communication and cooperation that would have impressed even the most advanced Council species, and they didn't see how human engineers studied every piece of Council technology they could access, taking it apart in their minds and putting it back together with improvements. They didn't see how human military academies taught the history of every Council species wars, studying their tactics, their strategies, their weaknesses. They didn't see how human shipyards built there, Class II vessels with modular designs that could be upgraded to Class 5 or higher in a matter of hours. Given the right circumstances, then they didn't see the anger that simmered beneath humanity's patient diplomatic surface, and the anger that grew with each condescending inspection, each dismissive comment, each reminder that humans were tolerated but not respected. Secretary General Santos attended every Council session as an observer, sitting in silence as the great civilizations made decisions that affected human space without consulting humanity, and she watched and she listened, and she remembered 20 years passed, and humanity endured, and the galaxy thought it had tamed the newcomers. Galaxy had no idea what was coming. New Singapore hung like a blue-green jewel in the darkness of space, one of humanity's proudest achievements. In the fringe sectors, and what had started as a barren moon orbiting a gas giant had been transformed over 15 years into a thriving colony of 300,000 souls. Governor Patricia Wei walked through the Central Market District, smiling as children played in the hydroponic gardens and vendors called out their wares in a dozen Earth languages and Mandarin mixed with Spanish, English blended with Swahili, creating the vibrant chaos that defined human colonies. Her grandson ran ahead, laughing as he chased his friends through the crowd, and she watched him with the contentment of knowing he would grow up among the stars, part of humanity's future. Then her communication implant chimed with an urgent priority signal. Governor, we have a situation, her chief of security said. and his voice carried an edge of barely controlled panic. "Council vessel just entered orbit, and they're broadcasting on all frequencies, and you need to hear this." Patricia moved quickly to the nearest public terminal and activated it, and the screen was filled with the image of a Creelan magistrate. Its segmented body coiled in what humans had learned to recognize as a posture of absolute authority. By order of Galactic Council Resolution 6847, the exotic matter deposits discovered in the new Singapore system are hereby claimed by the Creelan hierarchy under the Doctrine of Superior Claim. The magistrate announced all human extraction operations will cease immediately, and all human personnel will vacate the mining sites within 48 standard hours. And the Creelan hierarchy thanks you for your cooperation in this legal transfer of resources. Patricia felt her blood run cold. An exotic matter was the most valuable substance in known space. Used in FTL drives, power generation, and 1,000 other applications, and the deposits new Singapore surveyors had found 3 months ago were massive, enough to transform humanity's economic situation, enough to finally give them real leverage in galactic trade. And now the Council was simply taking it away on what grounds? Patricia demanded into the come. Knowing the Creelan ship would receive her transmission, New Singapore discovered those deposits, and this is our system under Council Charter. The response came back an hour later, and it was Ambassador Thelm's face that appeared on the screen this time, Governor Wei. The Council has reviewed the Creelan claim and found it valid under the Doctrine of Superior Claim, which states that resources of strategic importance may be reallocated to Council species with demonstrated capability to utilize them properly. Thelma explained with exaggerated patience. Humanity lacks the technological sophistication to extract exotic matter efficiently, and therefore the Creelan hierarchy, as experts in such operations, will assume control, and you will of course receive a finder's fee of 2% of extracted value. 2% of what they had found, and what they had claimed, and what was rightfully theirs. Patricia wanted to scream, and instead, she filed formal protests through every diplomatic channel available, and she contacted Earth and demanded they bring this to the Council, and she told her people to continue their mining operations until she received direct orders otherwise. The Creelan response came swiftly 3 days later. 200 Creelan enforcers landed at the main mining site, and the human workers there, led by Mining Director Carlos Mendez, stood their ground peacefully, and they held up signs in Earth languages and Creelan script, protesting the seizure and demanding justice, and they chanted slogans about fairness and rights. The Creelan enforcers formed a line and raised their weapons. Carlos stepped forward, hands raised and empty. "We are protesting peacefully," he called out in Creelan, his translator rendering the words in their clicking, chittering language. "We have the right to." The Creelan opened fire. The crowd had no chance, and plasma bolts cut through the peaceful protesters like a scythe through wheat, and humans fell, screaming, burning, dying, and some tried to run, and the Creelan shot them in the back, and some tried to surrender, and the Creelan killed them anyway. Carlos Mendez died with his hand still raised, and a young surveyor named Sarah Kim died shielding a colleague with her body, and a grandfather named Jin Park died calling out for his family. 47 humans died in less than 3 minutes. Massacre was captured on 24 personal recording devices, and within an hour, the footage was spreading across human space at the speed of light, jumping from system to system through the FTL communication network. Governor Wei watched the footage with tears streaming down her face, and her grandson tugged at her sleeve, asking why the people were hurting each other. And she had no answer that would make sense to a 6-year-old by the time the video reached Earth. Every human in the solar system had seen it, and they watched their people murdered for the crime of peaceful protest. And they watched the Creelan enforcers laugh as they cleared away the badass Creator General Santos, older now with silver streaking her dark hair, received the report in her office, overlooking the Geneva headquarters of the United Earth's government, and she watched the footage 3 times in silence. Then she scheduled an emergency session with the Galactic Council. The council chamber was half empty when Santos arrived, and apparently the massacre of 47 humans didn't warrant full attendance. An ambassador Thel lounged in his delegation area. Looking bored, Secretary General Santos. "We have received your request for an emergency session. The council speaker acknowledged you may present your grievance." Santos stood at the human delegation podium, and for the first time in 20 years, she allowed her anger to show. 47 human civilians were murdered by Krelin enforcers 3 days ago, she said, and her voice cut through the chamber like a blade. They were peacefully protesting the illegal seizure of resources they discovered, and they were unarmed, and they were shot down. Without warning or mercy, illegal seizure. Theln interrupted. "The council authorized the transfer under proper legal procedures, and if your colonists had followed the law, instead of obstructing Krelin operations, this regrettable incident could have been avoided." Regrettable incident, Santos repeated, and her voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the chamber. "You call the murder of 47 people a regrettable incident. The Krelin enforcers were within their rights to clear the area." The council speaker said the humans were trespassing on Krelin claim sites and refused lawful orders to disperse. "They were on their own colony world," Admiral Chen said from beside Santos, his voice shaking with rage. "On mining sites they established, and you're telling us they were trespassing on their own planet? The exotic matter deposits fall under council jurisdiction," Theln explained, as if speaking to children. "Perhaps humanity should better educate your colonists on proper conduct around their betters, and this tragedy might have been." The chamber fell absolutely silent, and even the other council delegates, who had been conversing quietly among themselves, stopped to stare at Theln. "Around their betters." Santos stood motionless for a long moment, and then something shifted in her expression, and the pleading, the desperation, the hope that the council might show justice. All of it vanished, and what replaced it was something the council had never seen from humanity before. Crystalline fury. "I came here today to ask for justice," Santos said quietly. "I came to demand an investigation. Prosecution of those responsible, reparations for the victims' families, and I was prepared to spend months, years if necessary, working through your legal systems to get it." She paused, and her eyes swept across the assembled delegates. "But you have made your position clear, and you see the murder of my people as a regrettable incident, and you see peaceful protest as a crime deserving of death, and you see humanity as inferiors who should know our place." Santos gathered her documents and began placing them back in her case. "So let me be equally clear, and humanity will remember this day, and we will remember every word spoken in this chamber, and we will remember that when we came to you for justice, you offered us condescension and contempt, and we will remember the 47. She closed her case with a sharp snap that echoed through the silent chamber. "This council has taught us exactly what we are worth in your civilization, and thank you for the lesson, and I hope someday you look back on this moment and realize what you've done." Secretary General Santos walked out of the chamber, and every human delegate in the building stood and followed her, and they left behind a council that sat in stunned silence, unsure what had just happened. Within 48 hours, humanity had withdrawn every diplomat from council space, and every trade agreement was canceled, and every cooperative venture was terminated, and humanity's borders closed like a door, slamming shut. The council barely noticed, and humanity was insignificant anyway, and they would come crawling back when they realized they couldn't survive without council protection. But in the fringe sectors, in the worthless systems humanity called home, something was beginning that would change the galaxy forever. Humanity was getting angry. The Galactic Council's Intelligence Division first noticed something strange 6 months after humanity's withdrawal, and human border patrols had become impenetrable, turning back any non-human vessel with polite but absolute firmness and requests for diplomatic communication went unanswered, and trade offers were rejected without explanation. "They're sulking," Ambassador Theln declared during a council security briefing. "Primitive species often withdraw when they feel slighted, and they'll exhaust their anger and come back with apologies in a few months." But months passed, and humanity remained silent. What started to worry the council's military analysts was not the silence itself, but what little they could detect happening behind it and long-range sensors. picked up massive increases in energy signatures from human systems and power generation, had increased by 300% across all human colonies and industrial output, had jumped even higher. They're building something. Admiral Korvax of the Valorix military told the council. They're detecting construction on a scale that makes no sense for their population size and every human colony. Every station, every settlement is working around the clock. Let them build, Deln said dismissively. What could they possibly construct that would threaten civilizations millions of years old, and they're still using our hand-me-down technology? Barely a step above their original primitive drives, but the analysts weren't convinced, and they recommended sending scout ships to investigate. Human space directly, the first scout ship crossed into the fringe sectors and transmitted its location and sensor readings for approximately 40 minutes, and then its signal went. Dark equipment failure, the council decided. Second scout ship was dispatched, and it lasted 37 minutes before silence. Then a third and a fourth, and none returned. They're destroying our scouts, Admiral Korvax reported, but we're not detecting weapons fire or debris fields, and the ships simply vanish. The council debated the situation for weeks, and some delegates argued for immediate military action, claiming humanity was clearly preparing for war, and others insisted on caution, suggesting humanity deserved the chance to explain themselves in the end. Bureaucratic inertia won out, and the council decided to wait and monitor and issue stern warnings through diplomatic channels, and surely humans would realize the futility of opposing galactic civilization. Meanwhile, in the depths of human space, something unprecedented was taking shapes. Secretary General Santos stood in the observation deck of Armstrong Station, humanity's largest orbital facility, and looked out at what her people had built in 20 months of frantic, desperate, angry work. The view took her breath away. Ships, and thousands upon thousands of ships, stretching as far as her eyes could see, but these weren't the massive dreadnoughts the council species favored. Each one a city-sized monument to power, and instead, humanity had built something different. Small vessels, no larger than atmospheric fighters, each one bristling with missiles, kinetic weapons, and the most advanced electronic warfare systems human engineers could devise, and they were cheap to build, quick to manufacture, and deadly in numbers that the council couldn't comprehend. The swarm doctrine, Admiral Chen said from beside her, pride evident in his voice. Every ship we lost in simulations showed us the same weakness in council tactics, and they rely on their shields, their armor, their individual vessels' superiority, and they've never faced an enemy willing to trade 10 ships to kill one of theirs, or 100. Santos said quietly, or 1,000 if necessary. The human military had undergone a complete transformation, and gone were the attempts to match council species ship for ship, and instead, humanity had embraced what they did best: innovation born of limitation, efficiency born of desperation, and the willingness to make sacrifices that more comfortable civilizations couldn't imagine. Every colony had contributed, and Mars had retooled its entire industrial base to produce fighter-class vessels, and the belt miners had converted their facilities to manufacture missiles by the million, and Luna's shipyards worked in shifts that never stopped, crews rotating through around the clock, and every human capable of piloting a vessel had volunteered. The military academies that had quietly studied council warfare for 20 years had produced a generation of officers who knew their enemy's tactics better than the enemy knew them themselves, and they had identified every weakness, every pattern, every predictable response. Human engineers had taken the Class 2 defensive weapons the council allowed and pushed them to their absolute limits, and then they had designed Class 5, Class 7, Class 10 weapons and hidden them in modular storage, ready to be installed the moment restrictions no longer mattered. Intelligence reports the Krelin hierarchy is getting nervous. Chen continued, they've been making inquiries about our silence and suggesting to the council that humanity might need to be reminded of their place. Santos turned from the viewport, and her expression was carved from ice. Let them come, she said. We've been waiting for them, as if summoned by her words. An alert sounded through the station, and Admiral Chen's command implant lit up with incoming data. Krelin battle fleet just entered the outer fringe sectors. An officer reported 300 warships. Heavy class, and they're broadcasting a demand for humanity to stand down and accept council inspection teams or face military pacification. 300 ships, and it was the largest fleet the Krillin had deployed in 2 generations, and clearly they intended to crush humanity's defiance with overwhelming force. Santos and Chen exchanged a look. How long until they reach New Singapore? Santos asked. 17 hours at their current speed. Good. Santos said that gives us time to position our forces, and Admiral may execute Operation 47. Chen smiled for the first time in months, and it was not a pleasant expression for the 47. He said throughout human space, the coal went out and pilots raced to their vessels, and colony defense forces launched from hidden facilities, and the swarm began to gather. The Krillin fleet advanced with confidence in their admiral. A veteran of a dozen conflicts, reviewed the intelligence on human capabilities with satisfaction, and humans had perhaps 5,000 ships total. Most of them converted civilian vessels, and the Krillin had 300 warships, each one capable of destroying 100 human craft. The math was simple, and the Krillin would break humanity's spirit. Install council-approved governors. Remind these upstart primates of their proper place. As the fleet approached New Singapore, the admiral noticed something odd, and sensors were detecting unusual readings from the asteroid belts, the moon clusters, the gas giants' rings, probably mining operations. His tactical officers suggested humans are known for their resource extraction activities. The admiral agreed and ordered the fleet into standard formation, preparing to deliver their ultimatum. That was when the asteroids opened fire. Hundreds of hidden facilities, carved into rocks humanity had been mining for 20 years, revealed themselves in missile pods, kinetic accelerators, and energy weapons emerged from camouflaged bunkers and opened up on the Krillin fleet. And that was just the opening move. From every direction, human ships emerged, and not dozens or hundreds, but thousands. Like a swarm of angry insects descending on lumbering giants, and they came from the asteroid belts, where they had been hiding with engines cold, and they came from behind the moons, where magnetic interference had hidden their signatures, and they came from the gas giants' upper atmosphere, where dense clouds had masked their presence. The Krillin flagship shields absorbed the first wave of fire easily, and then the second wave hit, and then the third, and then the fourth, and the human ships didn't stop coming, and they coordinated their fire with inhuman precision, overlapping their targeting so that shield sections were hammered by multiple strikes simultaneously. When a Krillin shield buckled, a dozen human missiles poured through the gap. The admiral watched in growing horror as his fleet began taking losses, and human ships were dying too. Dozens of them burning under Krillin fire, and but for every human vessel destroyed. 2 more appeared, and they didn't break off when damaged, and they didn't retreat when their comrades fell, and they just kept coming. They're ramming us. His tactical officer shouted in disbelief. Damaged vessels are deliberately colliding with our ships. It was true, and human pilots whose vessels were too damaged to fight effectively would aim for Krillin warships and accelerate to maximum speed, and the impact of even a small vessel at relativistic speeds was devastating. The battle that the Krillin admiral expected to last hours was decided in 47 minutes. When the last Krillin warship went silent, its crew dead or captured, Admiral Chen stood on the bridge of his command ship and surveyed the debris field, and human losses had been heavy. Over 800 vessels destroyed, nearly 3,000 pilots dead, but they had won, and they had proven that humanity's swarm doctrine worked. And now it was time to send a message. As a Craterol Santos appeared on every communication channel in council space, and her image was broadcast on civilian networks, military frequencies, diplomatic circuits, and she stood before a viewport showing the human war fleet assembled at New Singapore. Thousands upon thousands of vessels stretching to the horizon. The emergency council session convened within 6 hours of Santos's ultimatum, and for the first time in living memory, every delegate was present, and the chamber buzzed with agitated conversation in a dozen languages. Ambassador Thelm stood at the podium. His usual composure cracked. This is an outrage. He declared humanity has destroyed a Krillin fleet and threatens the council itself, and this cannot stand. And if we allow this challenge to go unanswered, every primitive species in the galaxy Will think they can defy us. They destroyed 300 Krelin warships, Admiral Korvax pointed out. Perhaps we should consider their demands, and the enforcers responsible for the New Singapore massacre could be absolutely not. The Krelin delegate hissed, "We will not bow to terrorist demands," and the enforcers acted within their legal authority, and humanity must be taught that such aggression has consequences. The council speaker called for order, and when the chamber quieted, they moved to the vote that would define the era. The question before this council is whether to support the Krelin hierarchy against human aggression. The speaker announced a military alliance to restore order and demonstrate that the council will not tolerate such defiance. The vote was unanimous. Council species committed their fleets to the defense of Krelin territory, and the Valorix Empire would contribute 400 warships, and the Drenary Collective pledged 300. And even smaller council members committed what vessels they could spare in total. The alliance assembled over 2,000 warships, and it was the largest combined fleet in council history, representing civilizations that had conquered galaxies. While humans were still learning to make fire, surely this would be enough. The fleet gathered at the Kepler staging area, just outside the fringe sectors, and Grand Admiral Vorith of the Valorix had been given supreme command. A grizzled veteran who had fought in 17 major conflicts across his long career, and he reviewed the human threat assessment with professional interest. They fight with numbers and coordination. He told his staff, typical of species that lack individual capability, and we will counter their swarm tactics with our superior shields, our superior weapons, and our superior discipline. And this will be a textbook demonstration of Y quality defeats quantity. The fleet advanced toward New Singapore in perfect formation. A wall of metal and firepower that stretched across space, and sensors swept ahead, detecting human vessels, and lots of them. They're waiting for us in the New Singapore system. Borith's tactical officer reported estimated 10,000 vessels. Mostly fighter class, only 10,000, Borith said with satisfaction. They exhausted their forces against the Krelin, and now we'll finish what's left. The council fleet entered the New Singapore system, and immediately the human vessels began their attack runs, and they came in waves. Just as intelligence had predicted, and they fired their missiles, their kinetic weapons, their primitive energy beams. The council fleet's shields held icily return fire. Vorath ordered, "Show them the futility of their resistance." Council warships unleashed devastating barrages, and human vessels exploded by the dozens, and their small size made them vulnerable. Their light armor no match for council weapons, and they died in flames and silence. But they kept coming, and then Vorath began to notice something wrong. The human ships were not just attacking randomly, and they were targeting specific vessels, specific shield sections, and they would sacrifice 5 ships to weaken one shield quadrant. Then 10 more would pour fire through the opening, and when a council ship's shields failed, human missiles would swarm it from every angle. They're adapting to our defensive patterns, his tactical officer said with alarm. Every time we adjust our shield frequency, they compensate within minutes. Vorith frowned, and that should be impossible, and shield technology was one of the council's greatest advantages, and it took years of study to understand the quantum mechanics involved. How were humans adapting so quickly? Then the ambush was sprung from the asteroid belt. From positions the council sensors had dismissed as mining debris, massive railgun batteries opened fire, and tungsten rods the size of buildings, accelerated to a significant fraction of light speed, slammed into council vessels, and shields that could deflect energy weapons struggled against kinetic projectiles with such tremendous mass and velocity. Ships that had weathered the human swarm attacks suddenly found their shields collapsing under kinetic bombardment, and that was when the second wave of human vessels appeared. These weren't the light fighters of the first wave, and these were heavier assault craft, each one carrying boarding teams, and they targeted council vessels whose shields had failed and attached themselves to hulls like parasites. They're boarding us, Vorith heard repeated across multiple channels. Human soldiers on Deck 7. One captain reported Deck 12 breached. Another called out there in engineering. Human Marines fought with a ferocity that shocked the council's species, and they didn't follow conventional boarding tactics. They used surprise, speed, and overwhelming close-range firepower, and They moved through council ships like they had studied the layout switch. Vorath realized with growing dread they probably had for 20 years. Humans had been observers in council space, and for 20 years. They had been buying council technology, touring council vessels, studying everything they could access. They had been preparing for this. The battle descended into chaos, and Vorath tried to maintain formation. Tried to coordinate his vast fleet, but the humans seemed to anticipate every move, and when he concentrated fire on one sector, they attacked from another, and when he split his fleet to cover more area. They focused their swarm on isolated vessels. They're using psychological warfare. His intelligence officer reported broadcasting the names of the new Singapore victims on all frequencies, and every attack
Run
is accompanied by the statement for the 47, and it's affecting crew morale. Vorath snarled, and morale should not matter to professional soldiers' end, but there was something unnerving about an enemy that fought with such personal investment and such willingness to die. Human fighter rammed his flagship's bridge viewport, and the impact sent shockwaves through the structure, and the pilot had ejected at the last second. And Vorath watched through the cracking viewport as a human transport picked up the ejected pilot and immediately turned back toward the battle. They were recycling their pilots and extracting anyone who survived and throwing them back into the sea. Fight within minutes. It was insane, and it was brilliant, and it was terrifying, Admiral. We've lost 30% of the fleet. His tactical officer reported human losses are at least 3 times that. But they have more reserves coming in, and our ships are taking critical damage, 30%, and in less than 3 hours. And the mighty council fleet was being bled dry by an enemy they had dismissed as primitives, all vessels. Focus fire on the human command ship, Vorath ordered, if we kill their leadership. The swarm will fall apart. It was a sound tactical decision based on centuries of military theory, and command structures were critical, and without leadership, forces became disorganized, but humans didn't fight like other species when. The Council fleet concentrated fire on Admiral Chen's command vessel, destroying it with overwhelming force. The human fleet didn't falter, and instead command seamlessly. Transferred to another vessel, and then another when that one was destroyed, and the humans had no single point of failure, and every ship could become the command node, and every captain could take tactical control. They had built a military structure designed to survive decapitation. Vorath stared at his tactical display as more council ships went dark, and the humans were paying a terrible price. Thousands of vessels destroyed, tens of thousands dead, but they just kept coming, kept fighting, kept dying, and kept killing. They're not going to stop, his tactical officer said quietly. Even if we kill 90% of them, the last 10% will still be trying to kill us. Vorath looked at the debris field, at the burning wrecks of council ships that had served for generations, at the casualty reports climbing higher every minute, and he thought about the human transmission that had started this for 20 years. We begged for justice, they had tried. Peace, and the council had given them contempt. And now they were showing the council what happens when you push humans beyond the point of reason, all fleet elements. Vorath said heavily, begin withdrawal to the Kepler staging area and maintain defensive formation. The council fleet began to retreat, and it was orderly, professional, by the book, but it was still a retreat for the first time in recorded history. The Galactic Council's combined military might had been forced to withdraw by a species they had dismissed as primitives. The human fleet didn't pursue, and they had accomplished their objective, and they had proven their point, and they had made the council bleed when Ambassador Thelm's personal flagship attempted to escape through a tertiary jump point. Human interceptors were waiting, and they disabled his engines with precision fire and boarded his vessel with overwhelming force. The proud Valoric's ambassador, who had sneered at humanity for 20 years, was dragged before a communication terminal and forced to face Secretary General Santos. One more time, please. Thelm begged, and all his arrogance gone, and his 4 eyes wide with fear. The Galactic Council chamber had never been so quiet, and the delegates sat in stunned silence as casualty reports continued to flow in battle. Damage assessments filled their screens with terrible mathematics. 800 council warships destroyed or critically damaged, and over 2 million personnel killed or missing, and a combined fleet representing 12 advanced civilizations, had been mauled by humans who had barely achieved FTL travel a generation ago. This is impossible. The Drenary delegate whispered, "Our civilizations have existed for millions of years, and how can primitives defeat us?" But the evidence was undeniable, and spread across their displays were tactical recordings from the battle and human vessels, swarming like insects and coordinating with machine precision and adapting to every defensive measure and sacrificing themselves without hesitation. The humans had lost moreover 15,000 vessels destroyed. Nearly 40,000 pilots killed, but those numbers meant nothing because humanity clearly had more ships, more pilots, more willingness to demand. That was what truly terrified the Council. They don't fight rationally. Species calculate acceptable losses and retreat when casualties exceed tactical parameters in humans. Just keep fighting until they win or everyone is dead. We need to negotiate, the Valorix representative said, and with Thel dead, a junior diplomat had taken his position before they bring their fleet to our home systems negotiate. The Krelin delegate hissed. They destroyed our fleet and executed a council ambassador, and we cannot appear weak. We already appear weak. The council speakers said quietly, "We appear defeated, and the question now is whether we compound that defeat with further losses or accept the new reality." The debate raged for hours, but the conclusion was inevitable, and species after species withdrew their support for the Krelin position, and some cited the original massacre as justification, and some simply didn't want to lose more ships, and some saw the opportunity to gain advantage over their council rivals by not committing more resources in the end. The Krelin hierarchy stood alone within 48 hours. The Krelin government issued a formal surrender, and they evacuated all personnel from New Singapore, and they turned over the 19 surviving enforcers who had participated in the massacre, and they agreed to pay reparations to the victims' families, but humanity wasn't Dona Secretary General. Santos appeared before the Galactic Council once more, and this time she wasn't asking for anything, and she was dictating terms. The Galactic Council will formally recognize humanity's sovereignty over all systems we currently occupy. She stated all restrictions on human military forces, vessel classifications, and territorial expansion are hereby void, and humanity will receive full voting rights in council proceedings, effective immediately, and if the council refuses. The speaker asked quietly. Santos smiled without humor. Then humanity will withdraw from galactic civilization entirely, and we will close our borders, and we will build our strength, and in 50 years, perhaps 100, we will return, and we will take our place at the table, whether you grant it or not. The threat was clear and unstated, and humanity had proven they could fight, and humanity had proven they could win, and humanity had time on their side. The council voted, and humanity was granted everything it demanded. The formal ceremony took place in the council chamber 1 month later, and Secretary General Santos stood at the podium where she had once pleaded for justice and where she had been dismissed as an inferior. Now she stood as an equal. Humanity accepts the council's offer of full membership, she said formally. We look forward to working with all civilized species toward a peaceful and prosperous future. Council delegates applauded with varying degrees of enthusiasm, and some were genuinely pleased, and some saw opportunity in humanity's military prowess, and some simply feared what would happen if they refused after the ceremony. In a private meeting with the council speaker, Santos delivered her final message. "I want you to understand something," she said quietly. "Humanity came to the stars hoping to find friends, and we wanted partnership and cooperation and a place among the great civilizations of the galaxy, and that was our first choice, and that was what we offered you." She leaned forward, and her eyes were hard as diamonds. "You rejected that offer, and you treated us as inferiors, and you took our resources, and you murdered our people, and you taught us that in this galaxy kindness is weakness, and patience is an invitation to exploitation, we learned." Santos continued, "We became what you made necessary, and we built weapons instead of schools, and we trained soldiers instead of scientists, and we prepared for war instead of peace, and all because you couldn't see past your own arrogance." The speaker said nothing, so here's what I want you to remember. Santos said, "Every time you look at humanity's seat in this council, and every time you negotiate with us, or work with us, or depend on us, and I want you to remember that we didn't choose this path and you chose it for us. She stood to leave and paused at the door. Humanity wanted to join your civilization as friends. She said, you taught us we could only survive as something you feared, and congratulations, and you succeeded. And we became exactly what you made necessary, but remember this, Santos added, and her voice dropped to a whisper what you saw it knew. Singapore was humanity pushed to the edge, and that was us fighting for justice. For our murdered people with restraint and rules and objectives, and pray that you never make us truly angry, and pray you never see what humanity looks like when we stop fighting for justice and start fighting for survival or vengeance. She left. The speaker sitting alone with that thought. In the years that followed, humanity became a major force in galactic politics and their military. Strength was respected, and their economic power grew, and their diplomatic influence expanded, and they participated in council votes, and they contributed to peacekeeping operations, and they became model galactic citizens. But everyone remembered other species looked at humans differently now, and there was respect where there had been contempt, and there was caution where there had been dismissal, and there was always an underlying current of fear, because humanity had taught the galaxy a lesson that ancient civilizations had forgotten, that the most dangerous species isn't the one with the biggest guns, or the most advanced technology, or the longest history. And the most dangerous species is the one with nothing left to lose, and the willingness to pay any price, and the ability to remember every wrong. The 47 colonists who died at New Singapore became legend across human space, and their names were taught in schools and carved into monuments and spoken. For every military deployment for the 47 came humanity's battle cry and a reminder and a promise. Ever again would humanity beg for justice, and never again would they accept the role of inferiors, and never again would they let strength be mistaken for permission to oppress and the galaxy. For all its ancient wisdom and vast civilizations and millions of years of history, learn to respect the humans not because humanity asked for respect, and not because humanity deserved respect, but because humanity has proven they would take respect by force if necessary, and they had proven they would survive any cost and win any battle. And remember, every slight the Galactic Council had wanted to teach humanity their place in the galactic order, and they had succeeded, and but humanity's place wasn't at the bottom as subjects, or in the middle as tolerated guests, and humanity's place was at the table as equals, backed by the strength to defend that position and the will to fight anyone who challenged its Secretary General. Santos retired 5 years after the Battle of New Singapore, and she lived to see humanity establish colonies in systems that were rich with resources and not just the barren fringe sectors, and she saw human culture spread across the galaxy, and she saw young humans grow up in a galaxy that respected them. On her final day in office, she stood in the memorial garden on New Singapore where 47 trees grew, one for each victim, and Governor Wei's grandson, now a young man training at the military academy, stood beside her. Was it worth it? He asked quietly. All the death, and the war, and the cost? Santos looked at the trees and thought about the battle, and thought about the pilots who never came home, and thought about the families torn apart, and thought about the price humanity had paid. No war is worth celebrating, she said finally, but sometimes peace has a price, and sometimes justice requires strength, and sometimes the only way to stop being a victim is to become something your oppressors fear. She turned to the young man. Your generation inherited a galaxy that respects humanity, and my generation paid for that respect in blood, and your job is to maintain it through wisdom and to never forget that strength. Without restraint is tyranny, and but restraint without strength is an invitation to oppression. For the young man said softly. For the 47. Santos agreed. In across the galaxy, from Earth to the furthest human colonies, from the council chambers to the battle fleets that patrolled human space, the words were repeated like a prayer, and a warning and a promise. For the 47th moment, humanity got angry. The galaxy learned that some species are dangerous not because of their technology or their size or their age, but because of their memory and their will and their absolute refusal to ever be helpless again.